Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you leave with valuable information to help in this difficult journey. Today's presentation is brought to you by Symphony of Life. Symphony of Life is the exceptional memory care program from 12 Oaks Senior Living. It is perfect for those experiencing cognitive impairment, as it encourages and stimulates mental acuity in addition to physical well-being. Caring and highly trained staff engage residents as they participate and function to their fullest potential. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Eileen Aldridge, a consultant with 12 Oaks Senior Living.
Okay, we are so excited to welcome Rachael Wonderland. She has her master's in gerontology. She's been a dementia care programmer for several communities before she started her own business in 2014, Dementia By Day, which was actually started with a blog. Rachael is a published author, and I've had the opportunity to look at some excerpts from the book and read blogs and articles, and I'm really excited to have you here today and listen to what you have to tell us today. So welcome, Rachael.
Thanks for having me.
So Rachael, let's go ahead and just jump right in. We know you have so much to offer us and tell us in regards to dementia and dementia care. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Okay, great. So today's topic is about choosing a dementia care community, why you would even think about making that change for a loved one, how to do it. I'll throw out there right away that my first book, When Someone You Know is Living in a Dementia Care Community, is really the best resource for this. So if this is a topic that you find particularly interesting, I have specific questions that I answer in each chapter of that book. My second book is called Creative Engagement, and that is all about programming in both a dementia care community and at home. So just contact for me if you'd like to reach out. Here is my info, and you can find me at rachaelwonderland.com. Here are some reasons that a family might consider a move. Mental health reasons, be it for the family or the person living with dementia or a related issue. Physical reasons, maybe the caregiver really can't physically take care of the person living with dementia anymore. If that person was to fall, could the care partner pick them up off the ground? Maybe not, especially if it's a spousal pair and, the man has dementia and the woman, is also 85 years old and really probably can't lift him. Behavioral reasons, if a person's behavior is becoming an issue, whether it be, that they're peeing in your houseplants because they don't realize where the bathroom is, or just because it is, again, too difficult to manage your own life while taking care of a person living with dementia. Familial reasons, distance. So these could be one and the same. If a family member who is the main caregiver lives 5 states away from the person living with dementia, does it really make sense to continue coordinating their care from there? Maybe not. Comfort. It really could be down to comfort. Is it more comfortable for the person living with dementia to be in a community? Is it more comfortable for the family? And personal preferences. I myself am a huge extrovert. I would do much better in a dementia care community than I would in like a home care environment. For some people, they think, well, I want to be at home forever. That could change as dementia progresses. So don't hold on to things that the loved one said decades before they got dementia about what they want as care. So often I talk to families who say, well, mom said to never move her to a home. Is that still the case? Is that really what's best for her? Things do change, especially as a person is living with dementia. So here's this kind of move-in day checklist. When you're thinking about making that transition, here are some notes and just some things to keep in mind for that move-in day. Paperwork should already be completed. Everybody needs to have high and positive energy, and all this stuff I'll get into in a little bit more detail in a second. it should probably feel like the person's idea, but it was their idea to transition into dementia care. No mirror notes. I helped somebody move to a community once, and the daughter had written a note and put it in the side of the mirror that said, "Mom, you have dementia, and that's why you're here." We never want to do anything like that. This all kind of comes back to this idea that we don't want to try to convince someone living with dementia that it's time for them to move into a community. It's not going to work. You're going to have a bad time. We never want to try to convince anybody living with dementia of anything. We don't want to wait until we get permission from somebody living with dementia to make the transition to a dementia care community. When families are considering a move, there's a lot of things that come into play. And one of the biggest ones is safety at home. I have found that a lot of times what people consider safe at home isn't really that safe when someone's living with dementia. So I've watched families leave notes on things for their loved ones with dementia. You know, "Mom, remember, don't go down the stairs," or "Dad, you don't actually have to go to work anymore. Don't leave the house." Or they'll install cameras everywhere. They'll, set up a security system. These things really are not taking the place of physical care. So without someone to help provide hands-on care, there's really not a whole lot that you can do to actually keep a person living with dementia safe at home. Safety really means there are other people there to help provide care. And there's nothing wrong with keeping somebody at home forever. Just, it may not be a fit for you. And that's really why I wrote my first book. I wrote my first book about moving someone to a dementia care community because I found that for a lot of families, living at home forever just wasn't feasible. It didn't make sense for them. And they wanted to feel okay about making that transition. And a lot of people don't, because they feel guilty or shameful. Even thinking about transitioning a loved one with dementia into a care community, people will say, "Well, she always told me she never wanted to move," or, "This person took care of me when I was a kid. Why can't I take care of them?" Taking care of a person living with dementia is just not the same as taking care of a healthy adult. It's just not. And so we never want to try to keep someone in a position where they're not really safe and they're not really healthy or happy, because it assuages a lot of our guilt. Guilt and shame come into play all the time in dementia caregiving, and it's particularly when the family has to make a tough decision. For example, is it time to take this person's car keys away? Probably, but families will often wait a long time because they're like, "Well, this is their independence. I don't want to take their car keys away. I want them to have the ability to drive." There's something I learned about called the grandchild test, which essentially just means, would you let that person drive in the car with their grandchild? And if the answer is no, then the answer to the whole riddle is, you better take their car keys. You better impound that car. Better get that car out of that driveway, because it's just not safe to have them driving by themselves. If they can't drive safely with another person, we don't want them driving at all. But people feel guilty. They feel like, I have to, keep this person happy. And by keeping this person happy, it's okay if I make it a little bit less safe. No, we need to pick safety over these other pieces. And so often, when it's time to transition a person living with dementia into a community, people will wait. Families don't want to move somebody because they feel bad about it. Or people will say to me, "How do I get mom to agree to move to a dementia care community?" The answer is, you don't. And by the way, let me make a note so people understand. A dementia care community is my phrase for what we sometimes call memory care, and what's pretty much always licensed as assisted living. So a lot of times there's an assisted living building, and they have part of the building that's for people living with dementia, or they have a standalone building for people living with dementia. Any number of ways to do this. I'm talking about a community that caters to people living with dementia. Typically, it is secure, so it is locked, and the residents can't just go outside and head on down the street because that would be bad. So these things come into play a lot with the guilt and shame. I don't want to lock her up. I don't, what about this? What about that? And so often I would get residents where I thought, man, this person would have done really well here 2 years ago. But families will wait so long that that person can no longer engage in activities. The person can no longer really make friends with other residents because they are so progressed in their cognitive decline that they would have actually done a lot better at our community a while ago. But I know why there was the wait. I mean, sometimes the wait is a money thing, but I think more and most often the waiting to move somebody is about the guilt and the shame. I think people will find a way to pay for things, find a way to make things work if they want it to work. But so often these other pieces really hold families back. And then the shame, do you have a loved one from out of town who's calling you and saying, well, I just talked to your mom yesterday on the phone and she seems fine, so I don't think you need to move her into one of those places. I hear that all the time. Someone will be from out of town and they'll say, I have thoughts about how you're taking care of your mom. It's like, oh, really? Do you? Unless you've been a full-time dementia caregiver, even if it's a long-distance caregiver, you have no idea the trials and tribulations of caring for a person living with dementia. So do not let any out-of-towners tell you how to care for that person. Here's some myths about senior care in general that I've heard. Everything is a nursing home. I hear this one all the time. People think senior care, they think like, oh, it's a nursing home. Nursing homes are specific designated levels of care. So it's a skilled nursing facility. What I'm talking about for the most part here is assisted living. So it's a different thing. And there are some super nice skilled nursing facilities or nursing homes. Things have come a really long way in the last couple of decades. I think people kind of think like, oh, everyone stares at the window all day. They think like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They think like a psych unit a lot of times. And that's one of the things I really dislike about Hollywood and how dementia care is portrayed a lot of the time, because you get a very incorrect look at what dementia care is. I was just talking on Clubhouse, which is a new app. It's like an audio app with some professionals in the industry about a movie that came out recently called I Care a Lot. And it's an entertaining enough movie, but wow, does it portray senior living in the worst possible way. And it's, it's this kind of stuff where it's like, it's only like one look at a community, and it's tough because if you're outside the industry, it's really hard to understand and conceptualize what really is going on. Oh, those places smell bad. Hey, guess what? We're taking care of a lot of people. And sometimes things aren't going to smell great when you have a lot of people in one space. But for the most part, these communities smell perfectly fine. My mom isn't like these people. I heard that all the time when I would do a tour of my community, wherever I was working. I would have people on the tour say, well, at the end of it, my mom's not like these people. I don't think my mom should be moving here. And so often, mom is like these people. It's hard to see someone's deficits sometimes. And with families, a lot of people put on the blinders, and so they don't see the changes in their loved one over time. And they don't see sometimes that their loved one really does need more care and would do well at a community. He'll hate me forever because he wants to stay home. I hear this one all the time as well. Is that true? And does he really want to stay at home? I was taking care of a woman at her house while I was in graduate school, and I did like an overnight shift. So I stayed overnight with her every couple of nights, and she would wake up multiple times during the shift and I would go and have to get her back to bed. But I would always chat with her before I got her to sleep. And it became clear to me through our conversations that she believed this house that she'd lived in for 50 years was a hotel, because she would say to me, "Oh, are you staying in the room over there?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "This is a pretty nice hotel." Stuff like that. I'd say, "Yeah, you're right. It is. And it's a nice hotel." And her family kept telling me, "Mom wants to be at home. Mom loves it here. She doesn't want to move." And I said to them one time, "Your mom has no clue this is her house. No idea this is her house." And she would do really well in a dementia care community. But of course, the family just was not into this idea. They didn't want to hear it. They were like, "Nope, nope, nope." But they were really struggling with getting her around the clock care. I was one of, I don't know how many, caregivers that they had scheduled independently, like lined up. But, I'm pretty reliable, but I can't say that about everybody. So I don't know, how hard it was, but my experience with home care has been that it can be a real challenge. Like if somebody calls off, even if you're working with an agency who can replace them, it does throw a wrench in your plans. Like, oh, someone new is coming over. The nice thing about a care community is if they're low staffed, they have to figure it out and no one's going to call you and tell you about it. So I've worked in, both home care, independent home care, and in senior living communities. So I've really been able to see the full pros and cons and the full range of care that a person can get. She'll never decide she wants to move. If you are waiting for a person living with dementia to tell you it's okay to do a thing, you're going to be waiting for the rest of your life. They're never going to say to you, "Hey, you know what? I think I probably shouldn't be driving anymore. Here are my car keys." They're never going to say, "You know what? I woke up this morning and realized I need to move to a senior living community." That's not going to happen. Unless you're super lucky and your loved one's the most agreeable person in the entire world, that's not going to be a thing. And so if we're waiting on somebody to agree to a thing, you're going to be waiting forever. You need to make that decision. Unfortunately, I know it's hard, but you need to make that decision for this person without their consent. They lock people up. Like I mentioned earlier, these communities typically are locked, but they're locked for a reason. I worked in a community that was not locked, but it was prepared for people living with dementia. We spent a lot of time, wasted a lot of time getting my residents back into the building. They'd go outside, they'd go into the rest of assisted living, we'd go and we'd get them. It was dumb. Locked units. So a community that is secure is safe. It's safer. Trust me when I say this is a thing that you do want. This is a thing you do want for your loved one. It really is not safe to have someone living with dementia in a place where they can just go outside and walk down the street, because there's a very real chance that they will not come back. They may not be able to find where they came from. They might not be able to tell somebody what they need. And this happens a lot, even in home care, probably more so, actually a lot more in home care, because families won't lock the door or they leave the person at home by themselves and then they head down the street. Feeling guilty is the ultimate caregiver villain. Back to that, I talked about guilt and shame a little bit. This guilt really prevents people from making safe and healthy decisions for their loved ones, because they think, well, they won't like it, or, I'll feel bad, or someone will tell me it was a bad idea. You got to make the change. Stopping a change, not changing because you're afraid, is not going to fly here. You really have to do the hard thing. And so often when a family would transition a loved one into one of my communities, the family would say to me later, "Oh, that was great. I'm so glad I moved my loved one there," because there's a sense of relief. I mean, they've been caring for this person forever. They've been managing the care. They've been doing everything. And now when this person's able to be in a community and be safe and have all their care taken care of, what a relief. Oh yeah. Oops. Ambiguous loss and anticipatory grief are other big parts of this whole thing. Ambiguous loss is the sense that even though the person is physically next to you, they have changed. And so there is this loss. It's ambiguous. Doesn't really make sense. You're thinking, well, I don't know why I should be upset because, they are right here. They have not died. Right. But they have changed. They have changed. They're not able to be, if this person is your partner, your spouse, they are no longer able to be that partner the way that they were before. And that's really challenging. So when it comes to, this kind of these feelings that come with caregiving, this ambiguous loss is such an influential piece. I had a woman say to me fairly recently, she had transitioned her husband into a care community setting. And she had said to me, it's so nice. This is, of course, pre-COVID. I can go and visit him and we can just lay in the bed together and watch TV and I can be his wife again. She said, for years, I was just the sole caregiver. I was just the caregiver. It wasn't really his wife. I was just a lady who took care of him. Now I can spend quality time with him. And anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is the feeling of grieving something in anticipation of that thing happening. So you're grieving another loss. And with dementia, right, there's this steady decline or this stepwise decline where you can see someone kind of going downhill. This loss is marked with grief. You're thinking, when is the next piece of this coming? What's happening next? You're always grieving something. And so to be able to have some space between you and that person living with dementia, I think is really powerful and really good for both you and for that person. When we're preventing issues when it comes to dementia care and transitions into care communities, the biggest thing that I could say is education, education, education. Being prepared for the change, reading up on it, talking to other people who have made it, and figuring out what can we do to make the move to dementia care as seamless as humanly possible. I mentioned earlier some move-in day checklist items, and really all of that comes back to how do we make this move as easy for everybody involved as possible. And I think the big part of that is education. The other big part of that is making sure that everyone who's involved, deeply involved with the transition, is not only okay with it, but is willing to put on a smile for a little bit while that original transition is happening. Because the person living with dementia is going to feed off of your energy. If you look like, oh man, this is a bad idea, or if you spend the days up until that person's moved saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to move you here and blah, blah, blah. Like you are really ruining it for yourself. You're really going to make it harder because they're going to go, oh my God, where am I going? Adjustments and changes. Transitions take longer for people living with dementia. If you've ever moved, right? Even if I just moved recently, we moved to a new house. We're still adjusting. It's been a couple weeks, right? We're still hanging things up. We're still putting stuff together. We're still figuring out where the grocery store is close by. These things take a while. And if you're living with dementia, it could take longer. So 3 days is not enough time to decide like, oh, I have people move in and they say, oh, you've had my mom for 3 days. Like she should be fine by now. She's not fine yet. We're going to move her out. It's like, whoa, 3 days is not enough time to make that transition. Reminding, we always want to remind families to getting residents engaged. So the new person who's living there should be able to engage with the other residents. What we don't want is sometimes what I see where the person living with dementia really stays in their room the whole time. Or when I've had spouses move to a community together, if the one spouse doesn't have dementia, sometimes they hold the other person with dementia back. So it'll be like, oh, well, why don't you stay with me. The person living with dementia should be able to be out and, talking to the other residents. And there isn't a right amount of times to visit. There isn't, the best time of day to visit or to call in this case, if you can't physically go in, is earlier in the day. Earlier in the day is better. If you're talking to somebody on the phone, if you're going in at like 5 o'clock in the evening, not a great plan. There's also not a right amount of times to visit or call. It really depends on you and your loved one. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, you have to wait 2 weeks after you move this person in to visit. That's not real. That's not a thing. It's really dependent on you, them, and your relationship. Please don't tell anybody living with dementia, this is where you live now. That sounds scary and permanent. And while their move probably is permanent, telling them this is where you live now is terrifying. So let's try something else instead. And I'll tell you what that is in a second. The importance of avoiding the word home unless we're utilizing long-term memory. Unless we're talking about, where did you grow up? We really don't want to talk about home, like, oh, I'm going home, or we should go visit your old house. None of that. So instead of saying this is where you live now, what if we said something like, oh, the doctor wants you to stay here until you're enter something physical, like arthritis heals, your arm feels better, your foot is what recovered. Enter physical piece, and then the piece of time you're saying until this heals. We never want to say you have to live here because the doctor says you have dementia. We can't see this, right? We can't see what's going on in here. But if something's ailing us physically, we can go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Like I should be here until my arm is better. Okay. And partially that's kind of true. Regardless, what we're doing is finding a reality that makes sense for the person living with dementia. We are, as I say, embracing their reality. We're doing what's true for them instead of trying to force our reality onto them. And we're not worried about lying. A lot of other people who teach dementia care will tell you that you shouldn't lie to people living with dementia. Take the word lying, throw it away. We're replacing with this concept of embracing someone's reality. When we're living in somebody's reality, we are always doing what is true for them. We are not purposefully making anything up. We are finding what their truth is, and we are doing that. And therefore, you are never lying in dementia care. You are living in their truth, wherever that is. People who have died are back alive. What they did 30 years ago is what's happening now, whatever it is. This is why we don't want to say, you live here now because you have dementia and we sold your house and all these things. No. And of course, don't forget about snacks. One thing with transitions is to keep it as seamless as possible. We really want to make sure people are eating well and drinking enough water during this kind of time, especially if it's a little more stressful. That is so crucial. Here's some questions that I've heard. How often can I visit? The answer is as often as you want, as long as we're not disrupting the person living with dementia. Same thing goes for phone calls. What if I come in and she doesn't recognize me? This is a problem that has been propagated by Hollywood in particular, but if your loved one has trouble recognizing you, it's not that they don't know you, it's not that they don't love you, it's that they can't place you on their timeline. This makes a lot of sense if you think about it. If they're 90 and they think that they're 40, how are you 65? If you're their adult kid, how are you 65 if they're younger in their mind than you are? Doesn't make any sense. So don't be alarmed and don't take it offensively. And please don't walk in the room and say, hey, mom, it's Rachel, right? Allow the person to assign you an identity. This doesn't happen to a lot of people living with dementia, but if it does, especially in later stages, allow them to name you. When someone asked me, my grandpa recently passed and in the last couple of months had some dementia symptoms, and I allowed him to tell me who I was. So when he said, who are you? The first time I said, who do you think I am? And he said, well, you're not my wife. I said, that's right. And then the next time he asked me, he said, who are you? I said, I'm Rachel. And he was like, okay. but I didn't tell him my identity and my relationship to him. Because how alarming would it have been if he thinks he's much younger than he is, and I'm saying, I'm your granddaughter. Well, that's kind of scary if you don't realize you have grandkids. How long should I wait before I visit the first time? Again, this is up to you. This is up to you. My brother thinks this is a bad idea. What do I do? Is your brother the power of attorney? No? Then who cares? I mean, it's not really who cares, but you need to do what is best for this person. And if he is the power of attorney, well, we're going to have to do some convincing. And again, I recommend my first book. My dad is still married to my mom, but now he keeps hanging out with that other resident and thinks she's his wife. How do I break them up? The answer is you don't. I actually have a blog post out today on this specific issue. So if you go back and go to my RachelWonderland.com and go to the Learn section and go to my blog, I have a post about this. The answer is you don't break them up. Consent is what it comes down to. So if they are two consenting adults and they're both cognitively aware enough to consent, then it's okay. Her shoes are missing. This is what happens in dementia care. People's shoes go missing. People go into other people's rooms. It's dementia care. It's not a big deal. He's not eating enough. In later stages of dementia, oftentimes people will eat less, but there are ways to get people to eat more. And there are numerous, it depends what that person used to like to eat, etc. Visiting and leaving. Bad plan. I'm going home now. You live here now. Don't you recognize the things in your room? See, it's your room. Here's a good plan. I'll be back later. Or if you're on the phone, we'll talk later. The doctor wants you to stay here until your fill in the blank heals. Let's go to lunch. I brought something for you to try. All of these things are good plans. The bad plans will get you into trouble every single time. So, bringing this all together, the key here is to make sure that you are making decisions that are best for the person living with dementia, not for what that cousin from out of town thinks you should be doing. You also have to bring yourself into it. You know, how are you feeling about this process? Are you overwhelmed? Are you exhausted? Are you totally tired of being somebody's 24/7 caregiver? Well, then it is time for a change. Maybe that change is bringing in home care. Maybe that change is looking at an adult day program. Maybe that change is transitioning that person to a dementia care community. But regardless, that change needs to happen. A change must be made because it will burn you out. And if you're at the point where you're already so exhausted that you don't think you can do it anymore, you're already burnt out. It's time to make a change. And even if that change brings with it difficulties, the short-term pain of it will turn into eventually some long-term relief for you. Thank you for tuning in, and I will take your questions now.
Rachael, that is some wonderful information. Gives us many, many opportunities to look at. And those of us that work in dementia so often and every day, you know, we hear this every day. We hear these families that come in and they're exhausted and yet they're holding on. So I know one of the questions that we had is maybe to elaborate on that a little bit. Those families that have come in and they're like, I know I need to move them. And of course you do. You always have that relative that lives miles and miles away that doesn't see something every day. And I'm exhausted. And yet I promised my mom I would never move her. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit on maybe some of those bullet points that you would tell that person that's having such a tough time?
Sure. I think the main point here is we need to take a couple things into consideration. How you're feeling. And, you know, with that, are you able to really be providing the best possible care? You know, because if you're totally burnt out and exhausted, you're not being the best caregiver that you can be to this person. And you would be a better caregiver and a healthier person if you were to get some help. So if you think of it that way, if you're thinking of it like, I want to do the thing that's best for my loved one, well, is keeping them at home and being their sole caregiver really the best thing for them? And when people say to you like, oh, never move me to a home, probably that was a long time ago. They're probably thinking of a one flew over the cuckoo's nest kind of environment. And, it might not be true anymore. And also, if the person knew how much care they were going to need, chances are pretty good that they would never have told you, never move me, right? They probably would say, look, do whatever you need to do to keep me safe, but then, make sure you're okay, right? I can't think of too many, parents who would say, look, you got to take care of me at home no matter what, even if you're totally burnt out and exhausted and crying every day, like you got to, too bad, right? People don't realize how much work caregiving is, and no one really expects to get dementia. So
that's right. That's so good. I love the honesty and just the forthright of coming and talking to somebody, because I think you're so right. We're dealing with so many people that this is almost the first generation of people walking their loved ones into great memory care communities.
yeah.
That's another question that actually had come up as well. As the question was, and you touched on this, I thought this was great, of that memory care community, that secured environment, maybe versus the assisted living community, that might be good with that person with dementia, but it's not a secured environment of the doors are locked and it's not as secured. So how do people make that decision?
To transition them to a secure community from assisted living?
To either go to, so they've got the in between of an assisted living that certainly works with dementia. They have programs of helping people in that journey that they're in right now, and or going into more of a secured environment. The difference of those two.
I think it depends on the type of care a person needs, assisted living sometimes, or independent living. Independent living is not appropriate for people living with dementia at all. Assisted living could be in very early stages, but oftentimes that person needs more physical and emotional care, and they also really can't engage necessarily in the same programs and activities that a person who doesn't have dementia can. So, everybody's playing bingo every day. Is bingo really great for people living with dementia? Not really. Can this person remember that they need to walk down to lunch? No? Okay, well then, we need to make sure that these things are being, taken care of. And if the person doesn't know they need to go to lunch every day, in assisted living, nobody's taking them. Like, nobody's going into their room and being like, hey, it's time for lunch. They're just assuming, well, they're here in assisted living, they just need to be assisted, they don't need to be guided to lunch. Where in dementia care, you're going to people's rooms and you're going, okay, it's lunchtime, let's go. And you're making sure everybody's there, and you're keeping a head count of who ate lunch.
Yeah, that's so true. I know in our memory cares, we've got a Symphony of Life program that it just helps people coming in be successful, the quality of life and what they're doing, and the success. I just think that's wonderful. So this was a good question somebody came up with. What kind of changes and conditions should I expect after moving of my family member?
What kind of changes and conditions? It's impossible to say, honestly. It's super dependent on the person. Hopefully they'll do well and, get, improve a little bit in their ability to communicate with others. But dementia care is not a fix. It does not fix dementia. You're not going to be able, there's nothing out there that's going to make them come back to how they were before. So don't transition someone to a care community and then get mad because the community hasn't solved the fact that they don't, drink enough water or whatever it is. And I actually have a part in my book about this concept that, like caregiving is an imperfect science. It's not a perfect science. Taking care of another human being takes trial and error.
Yeah, that's Rachel. I love hearing you say that because so often we hear, I moved mom and now her dementia is worse. And what we see a lot of times, and tell me if you've seen this, is a reality. They've been maybe in more of a environment that they've known longer. So they move, and now we're seeing really a reality of where they are in their dementia. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I see that a lot. I think, especially if someone hasn't been living with that person, they're not really seeing the decline. And then all of a sudden it's way clearer, what that person really needs or when that person's not next to you all the time, you're able to get a better picture of like what's actually going on.
Right, absolutely. That's great. That's really good information for people to have. Thank you. I appreciate that. So here's another question. When will I know if keeping my mom at home is no longer an option? I really think you touched on this. I don't know if maybe you want to give us one other just really good clue on when will I know?
If you've been thinking about it, it's time.
I like
That's
that.
the one sentence answer. If you're asking that question, it's been time and you're putting it off.
And I really enjoyed what you said in regards to it probably should have happened 2 years prior, that we actually see them more successful if they move sooner.
Earlier in their cognitive loss, because they can engage with the other residents. They can, come out and do programming. But when we wait too long, they get to a point where they kind of don't need dementia care anymore. They need nursing care.
Yeah, that's that is so great. That education that you mentioned was so great to help people be more successful as they move forward. That was just perfect. How do I get my dad to understand, and you touched on this as well, understand he can't live alone anymore?
You do not. Stop trying to make him understand it. It ain't gonna happen. You just have to make the transition for him. Don't stop trying to convince him of stuff.
I knew you had touched on that, and I just had to go there again because
that's okay. I hear that same question all the time. Yeah. How do I convince them of this thing? You don't. You do not.
You don't. I think many of us have sat with family members, and they so badly want mom to say, "Oh, yes, I would love it here, and I want to move here," and it's so difficult.
Yeah.
That was good. I had to touch on that again. Now this one, and I know you've seen this. I don't enjoy visiting my mom, but feel guilty when I don't. How can I make it easier for me?
I would be curious what about the visit is painful and see if that can be alleviated. Maybe a phone call would suffice. Maybe writing letters back and forth with the help of the care, like a staff member would work. What about the visit makes you feel badly? And that's the part that I'd be curious about. I can definitely understand feeling guilty if you don't visit at all. But you can also set it up so if you're like, well, I don't like going, but if I go, once a month on this day, at least it's in your calendar and you're like, I know I'm going to go visit, but you don't need to visit all the time. You could also do that, but I would be curious what the reasoning is behind.
Do you see, I know I've seen often that those family members, and you touched on this as well, were grieving. They had that grieving, and so that grieving was hurting them to the core, and it was hard to go in and see people.
And that's probably a large part of what they're going through. Yeah, I think coming to terms with that grief is part of it, and allowing yourself the space to grieve, even though you feel guilty for grieving because you're like, well, they're still alive. Allowing yourself to feel that and be okay with the fact that you're grieving and not judge yourself for grief.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. That's very real. That's such a real feeling for people. We understand that. The next question that we received was, what causes dementia? Is it hereditary?
That's a huge question. There are over 100 different causes of dementia. Dementia is really just a list of symptoms, believe it or not. Yes, it's hereditary, but almost everything is to some degree. So everything, pretty much every disease out there, almost every disease out there is some mix of environment and, is the nature nurture, debate, right? That's not really a debate at all. It's a mix of these two things. To say like which part is hereditary and which part is not is difficult. Early onset Alzheimer's disease, in particular, the early onset is quite hereditary. So if a parent got Alzheimer's specifically before the age of 65, your chance of getting it is definitely increased above the normal population. But that's the simple answer. The complicated answer is we could talk about it for days, but yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly a fear. I know that people have when they see mom or dad or somebody with dementia. My dad keeps asking for my mom, but she died a few years ago. Should we keep telling him?
No, for the love of God, stop telling him that she died, please. It's not cool. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to say, where do you think she is? And he's going to say, I think she's wherever she is. And you're going to say, yeah, sounds about right. That's probably where she is. Done. Right? Ask him where his reality is and then go there.
Yeah, that I have to go embrace the reality. Embracing the reality is so true. And yet again, in your words, if we could educate on embracing the reality, it would be easier for people to visit. It just answers so many of these questions even. I never know, and this really piggybacks off of this, so it might be redundant, but I never know what to say or do with my mom who has dementia. I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells to avoid an argument or a blow up.
I think that comes back to embracing her reality, living and doing what's true for her instead of bringing your own issues to the conversation. Talk about what's happening right in that moment, or talk to her about what you did that day or whatever. Talk to her about things that happened years ago. That's always, long-term memories are a good thing to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, long-term, yes, definitely. I never know. I'm sorry. That's the same question. I apologize. You talked about what the difference was between a nursing home.
Mhm.
Can you just touch on that one more time? Because we hear that so often that families come in and there are maybe some skilled needs they're needing in the regards to maybe going to the restroom or help with that. And they're not understanding that difference of those activities of daily living versus those quote unquote skilled needs. So maybe you can help them understand that a little bit better.
Skilled nursing is for people who really need pretty much round the clock physical care. If they can't get out of bed by themselves, if they need a couple people to physically assist them to get out of bed, if they can't feed themselves at all independently, and this is the first time you're moving them, in most dementia care communities, people can be assisted with these things. But if you're looking to move somebody from home to a community and they already have a great deal of physical needs, then skilled nursing might be the way to go.
Okay, that's good. I think that'll help quite a few people in understanding
Sure.
those differences. I think this is so good, and one that people need to, and you can give them your expertise on this. How do I choose? How do I choose the right community? There's so many out there. What do I look for?
First, I would pull up on Google Maps, your location and how close you want them to be, and look at the communities within whatever radius that you want, and really go visit. Or if you have to do a virtual visit, it really comes down to the vibe and the energy there. If you walk in, do you like it? What's do the other families who have transitioned loved ones there, do they like it? All of those things, but it really comes down to how you feel about it.
That's wonderful. There is something to be said for that gut feeling.
Yeah.
As you walk into a community
Mhm.
and knowing what to look for. I think that gives us so much great information on helping people understand dementia and memory care. I love that you are so pro knowing how good it can be for people to go into a community, and that there's times that it's not right or it's not right for them, and that's okay as well. So it gives them those opportunities. So Rachael, I thank you so much. That was great information. And I look forward to continue to watch your blogs. Those are great. I really enjoy those.
Thanks.
Thank you.
On behalf of 12 Oaks, I'd like to thank Eileen and Rachael for spending time with us today and for their insight and great information. I'd also like to thank all of you who joined us. For more information or to find a Symphony of Life program near you, go to www.12oaks.net. Take care and have a great rest of your day.